Hey everyone, welcome back to my reaction series. I think I'm starting to really love doing these, but we'll see how it goes. Today, I'm going to be reacting to one of Jordan Peterson's videos on his lecture in the Exodus series. To be honest, there are a lot of clips that I would like to react from his series, but I just thought I would start with this one. He and a few other scholars will be discussing Exodus chapter 9, verses 8 through 12 and talking about why does God let bad things happen, which is a very thought-provoking question to kind of ask. So without further ado, let's get straight into today's video.
We're in Exodus 9:8, in the midst of the plague. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had spoken unto Moses.
It's very important to know one quick thing on the Hebrew. It does not say stiffen, or what was that the word in the King James? Harden. It is clear what it says. This is easy. Vayechazek. The word chazak is in modern Hebrew as well. It means strengthened. He strengthened Pharaoh's heart, which goes back to my original point. He gave him free will. He did not deprive him of free will.
Right, that's a crucial point.
Crucial,
point.
yes.
Yeah, so I wonder why it was translated as harden, or even maybe harden didn't mean exactly the same thing at that time in the translation.
That's right. That's just as when King James says, "Thou shalt not kill," for the commandment, which is "Thou shalt not murder." In those days, kill was murder.
Yeah, but you can understand hardening of the heart as a strengthening of the will, in the sense that it's like a crystallizing of the Pharaoh's will. Like his will gets locked in, basically. And so you can
But
understand
it's still up to the Pharaoh.
It's up to the Pharaoh, but it's like
As long as we know it's up to the Pharaoh.
Yeah. No, that's a very important.
Of course, there's also the point.
So it is evident that Dennis Prager has a significant issue with the KJV translation, and his frustration is quite apparent, right? He seems to be expressing kind of a mild complaint, but even his mild tone reflects his frustration on this point. However, I do appreciate Dennis's clarification on this point, because understanding the word harden in this passage can greatly influence one's theology, right? So like, for instance, if you interpret harden in this passage as meaning that God used his divine power to control Pharaoh's actions from that point forward, it may lead to questions about our free will. Are we merely glorified robots? Do we truly have the ability to make our own decisions? Or is God, the one dictating all our choices while giving us the illusion of autonomy, right? Moreover, if this is the case, how many times has God hardened people's hearts throughout human history? And if God leads us towards deeper depravity, how can he find fault in us, right? So you see all these questions that kind of stem from that misinterpretation of that scripture. Although these questions may have flaws, they are the type of inquiries that inevitably arise when translating the word harden in this passage in such a manner, right? So now, I agree with Dennis when it comes to clarifying what this passage does not mean. I don't believe it is saying that God dictates all or even some of our actions. However, while it is important to clarify what is not meant in this passage, we should not lose sight of what is meant. Jonathan accurately explains to Dennis why the translators possibly used the word harden instead of strengthen, right? So to be fair, both words can convey the same meaning, but I particularly like the example that Jonathan provides. He mentions how this is like God solidifying our will, or crystallizing it, as he put it. In this moment, God does something that I hope none of us would ever ask for, right? He allows us to follow our own desires without any restraint from him, right? We as human beings possess volition, which means that we have a will and we use it to make decisions on a daily basis. However, it is important to recognize that God also limits the full expression of our will. And why? Because if everyone acted solely on their own desires, the world would be drastically different. For instance, not many people would choose to remain committed to just one spouse for their entire lives. Heck, some of you don't even follow it right now. Why limit oneself when there are so many options available, right? So that's what a lot of people would ask themselves. Why work long hours to afford something you want when you can simply just take it from somebody else? Or why bother forgiving and loving your enemies repeatedly when you can eliminate them and just be done with the hassle, right? So you see all of these questions start to arise. Now, some of you may be thinking, look, Janai, we're not monsters, right? We know how to exhibit basic decency, right? However, I would argue that it is not solely our inherent goodness that maintains order in this world, but rather the intervention of a good God who knows when to intervene and when to allow our wills to play out, right? So I think that was a good point, a good kind of dialogue between Dennis Prager, Jonathan, and even a good follow-up question from Jordan Peterson in that clip. So we're already getting into a pretty good video. So let's kind of play some of the rest of it.
Point that still saying the Lord is behind this, and so the contention there is that the principles of reality itself are being shown forth here, and Pharaoh is himself within them, and that doesn't undermine his free will, so to speak, in the way that you're saying so well, Dennis, but rather it shows that it is itself, you might say, conditional upon these principles.
Well, he strengthened him to be the fullest version of himself.
Fair way.
Yeah, well, we don't.
Now, I think Dr. Stephen is correct in emphasizing the role of God in this passage. Dennis correctly highlighted what the passage is not saying, while Jonathan pointed out what it is saying. However, Stevens seems to have uncovered the key to it all. You see, God is the source to all life, truth, wisdom, goodness, and much more. Disconnecting oneself from the source, from God, is like committing spiritual and physical suicide. You know, this decision can lead to a sudden and a swift fall, just like jumping off a cliff, or it could be a slow and steady process like cancer, right? But one thing is for certain, that destruction is inevitable. That is because God does not change, and his role as the source of all good things will not change either. Now, I want you to consider the point in conjunction with the fact that the Lord is sovereign, meaning he rules over all things, including time, space, matter. Nothing in this world happens without God not only knowing it will happen, but also allowing it to happen. When we read about Pharaoh's heart being hardened by God, it serves as a reminder that even in our decisions made with free will, we are still subject to the sovereign rule of God and his word, which I believe Dr. Stephen is referring to when he mentions the principles of reality. Now, I would like to direct your attention to Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. And let's pull that up real quick. Give me one moment. Let's see. Where are we at? Romans chapter 1. All right. So we have that. So it reads, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invincible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal men and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore," now I want you to focus on this part, "God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." Right? So I love Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 25, because it tells the story of how one develops a hardened heart. God has revealed not only his general revelation to us, but also his special revelation. Yet many of us still deny his existence. Some may not deny God verbally, but their actions deny him, which, they live as if God doesn't exist, which I believe is much worse. It's the suppression of truth that leads to a hardened heart. This constant decision eventually leads to God's ultimate judgment, which is giving us up to ourselves. Now, I want you to think about that. Isn't that crazy? The punishment for disregarding God and his word is that God grants us the freedom to pursue our own desires without restraint. It's interesting because in our society, we frown upon anything that may infringe upon our supposed freedoms. And this applies to both political parties, right? On the left, we kind of see a battle for freedom to express and define our own sexuality as we see fit. However, complete freedom, right, in this area can lead to a loss of meaning of things like sex and gender, resulting in chaos, confusion, and a denial of basic truths, right? And on the right side of the aisle, there is a battle for freedom of speech. And while it may seem noble, closer examination reveals that some of the frontline people, right, may start to express things like racism or misogynistic ideologies and vengeful comments in the comment section of these social media platforms that right-wing pundits may create, right, for, the promotion of free speech. And this raises the question, is this what we're fighting for, right? So that we can have a bunch of racist and misogynistic people, spewing their opinions without getting canceled on Twitter or Facebook, right? So could it be a possibility that the limitations on freedom of speech, as argued by the left, have some merit, right? Although flawed, has some merit to them. Similarly, could the right be onto something when arguing for limitations on freedom of expression, right? Now, I don't want to stray too far from my main point, which is this: complete freedom to pursue what we deem right and wrong is the clearest indication that God has given us over to a debased mind. We may not see it because our hearts are too hardened to even look. We are created to live in harmony with God, not independent of him. God desires us to make free will decisions. That's why he made us volitional creatures. However, he wants us to make decisions that align with his will, the created order of the world, and not against it, right? So again, I thought this was a very good point to kind of react to. The next kind of section I want to play, it's going to be a little bit longer, so I want you to stick with me here. But let's get right back into the video.
You also say, if we're going to accept the principle that a universe with free will in it is better than one without, even though that might allow for the emergence of evil, then we have to be willing to assume that if God is allowing even the Pharaoh free will, that is in some sense a reflection of something that's in the highest place.
Yes.
Right. And I think you can make a pretty good case that for will to be as free as it can possibly be in the metaphysical sense, it has to be able to span the entire dimension of choice between radical evil and radical good. And so...
But you remember in the first 5, it's Pharaoh who does it. And now, after the second 5, the Lord does it to him. In other words, he's driving him to the logic of his own settled choice, which is a biblical form of government, of judgment.
Right, well, that's a way to understand judgment. Even in the New Testament, you have the sense in which judgment is the consequence of your own decisions.
Right.
It's the natural consequence of your own actions, and that brings about...
And a reflection of your own actions. And there's warnings about that consistently in the Sermon on the Mount, right? That you're going to be judged by the criteria that you use to judge others, that's inevitable.
I love how Jordan Peterson...
Because they reflect it back to you, and you also practice it, and then necessarily and inevitably apply it to yourself.
And the fruits of your actions ended up almost being sometimes a judgment that is brought back upon you. But if you take drugs, you could say someone is a coke addict, and then you could say, well, God is judging you, but the judgment is just the behavior itself playing itself out on you, right? The natural.
By the way, did y'all see that series on Netflix called Painkiller? It's a very good series, has nothing to do with the topic at hand, but very good series. You should go check it out. I probably should do a reaction video to it, but I thought it was very informational. It's just the thoughts that pop up in your head, when he mentioned drugs. It was on drugs and I think Purdue Pharma. Again, off topic, very great series though.
The world has God created the world with an order. If you break that order, the consequences come. So you could call it.
That's my argument. You'll love this, because I love what you just said. So when I teach the 10 Commandments, I ask people, so what's the punishment for violating the Sabbath? And what I'm about to give you as my answer is heartfelt because I know it from my own life. The punishment for not observing the Sabbath is you miss the Sabbath.
That's good.
And because if you keep it regularly, as I do, and you miss one, you really miss it.
What do you miss? Like personally?
Oh, the rhythm of my life is that one day a week I leave the world. And if I don't leave the world that day of the week, 14 days go by when I have lived a secular life, and it gnaws at me.
This is such a fundamental principle because it's so easy to approach a religious text as if this is somehow, a myth someone made up that, about a God that is external to reality. He's going to punish me, but that really what this text, I think, is about is precisely this principle, is showing us from within what the principles of the real are. And this dictum that you've just given us about the Sabbath, which is so beautiful, this occurs also in Plato in the Gorgias. He says, it is worse to commit than to suffer wrongdoing. This is taken up by Boethius and others who argue that, goodness is its own intrinsic reward. I mean, you are one with the goodness you have done,
right.
just as evil is its own intrinsic punishment. And so
that's reflective of an intrinsic moral order.
Yes.
So I want to end the video with that clip because I know that was a lot to take in, right? But essentially what I believe these gentlemen are getting at is this. Sometimes the punishment of going against God's created order is living in the chaos that ensues, right, from your decision. Use an example that Dennis Prager used with this Sabbath. He is absolutely right to point out that the punishment of missing the Sabbath is that you miss the Sabbath, right? And I tell my wife this all the time because she's definitely more of a busybody than I am. I tell her, look, I work hard Monday through Friday. Saturday and Sunday are the 2 days that I really look forward to. We can do something on one of the 2 days, but it can't be for both because at that point, where does the rest come into play, right? In America, I feel like we do the most sometimes, right? And that, we forget to rest and just take a break from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Sometimes you just need a day, right? You need a day to relax, chill, kick up your feet, think about all the goodness and greatness that, God has done in your life. Some of you, may work on Saturdays. So, let Sunday be your Sabbath. Choose whatever day that you don't work on and let that day be your day of rest. But do not push yourself day in and day out and not set aside time to rest as the Lord rested at the beginning of creation. And I also appreciate what Dr. Stevens said when he quoted Gorgias, stating that it is worse to commit evil than to suffer wrongdoing. When you commit evil, you not only face the consequences of your actions, but you also have to deal with the guilt that comes from within, right? In the case of violating the Sabbath, your conscience will tell you that something is not right. The consciousness may include mental and physical fatigue, but there is also a sense of guilt associated with violating the Sabbath, regardless of your familiarity with Christianity, right? That moral code is ingrained in our hearts. And when we violate it, it serves as a constant reminder to us that, hey, we need to set aside a day for the Sabbath, for a day of rest. Now, look, if you made it this far in the video, you might be wondering, how does any of this relate to the question, why does God allow bad things to happen, right? Well, I would say that each of these points is like branches that stem from asking this question, right? Simply answering the question would be, I believe, insufficient because it would only open the Pandora's box to many other questions that will only seek to undermine the initial response to the initial question being asked, right? So like one perspective that you can give to the question, why does God allow bad things to happen, is that God may allow bad things to happen so that good things can also occur, right? This is a point that Jordan Peterson makes in this portion of the video. To achieve radical good, one must allow the existence of radical evil is essentially the point that Jordan Peterson makes. And this is actually exemplified by the events surrounding the crucifixion, right? So Christ's death for the sins of humanity, the greatest good in human history, was only possible because of the radical evil of unjustly murdering the Son of God, right? So although I wouldn't personally use this reason that Jordan Peterson gave as a reason for why God allows evil to exist in the world, it is a thought-provoking reason, right? One that, you know, can be kind of backed by scripture. Another viewpoint that I've heard is that God allowed bad things to happen to maybe preserve free will, or because the eradication of evil will require eradicating all of humanity, as we are the primary agents of evil in this world. So as you can see, any answer that I provide to this question only leads to more questions. And this is because our minds are limited and we will never fully understand why God allows evil to exist. However, what we do know is that one day he's going to completely eradicate evil whenever Jesus returns, and boy, what a day will that be, right? Hence why, look, this is the goal of Christian living. We live so that one day we can live again, right? So anyways, guys, that's the video. Look, if you enjoyed it, please leave a like. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel. Feel free to share it with your friends, family, share it on your social media platforms, as it is helpful. I really want to get this channel up to 300 subscribers. So if you can help me with that goal, that would be much appreciated. But until next time, guys, peace.